Hi, I'm Shaye Larkin, and thank you for visiting. If you've watched my other videos, you know that I'm a bankruptcy attorney here in San Francisco, and this video is about your Bankruptcy Meeting of Creditors, also known as the Section 341 Meeting of Creditors, or as I call it, your bankruptcy hearing. I like to just call it the bankruptcy hearing because although it's not a formal hearing in front of a judge, it still has some formalities to it. You're under oath, you're recorded, and there's an American flag in the corner. But also the term meeting of creditors is kind of confusing because when you hear that, you think all of your creditors are going to show up and yell at you, and that's not what happens. Sometimes creditors show up, but that's rare. There are certain creditors that are more likely to show up than others, and that includes former spouses, ex-business partners, investors in a business, and sometimes landlords. Those are the types of creditors that sometimes show up if they happen to be angry, but generally, in most cases, there are no creditors that show up. Now, I handle both Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy cases, and the hearings are conducted a little differently depending on which chapter you're in. We'll talk about Chapter 7 first, and then Chapter 13, I'll discuss what's a little bit different. In a Chapter 7, well, first of all, for any meeting of creditors, you always need to bring proof of your social security number and a photo ID, and it has to be a government-issued photo ID. So for proof of your social security number, you can bring either your actual social security card, or you can bring a W-2 from your employer for the most recent tax year, or a 1099 from the most recent tax year. Or if you happen to have an insurance card that has your complete social security number on it and your name, then you can bring that. But remember, you must bring original documents, not photocopies. So it's not okay to bring a photocopy of your social security card. For your photo ID, it has to be government issued and it cannot be expired. So it could be a driver's license, a state issued photo ID, or passport. Those would work. And if it's expired, then you're going to have to come back with an unexpired photo ID. They won't hold the hearing. Sometimes they'll continue to hold the hearing if you forgot your social security card, but you'll absolutely have to come back to bring the proof in later. But as for photo ID, they won't even conduct the hearing if you forget that. So, continuing with Chapter 7, 341 hearing, these generally go very quickly. You're in and out. Once they call your name, you're usually done in about 2 minutes. Not always. If you have a particularly complicated case, it can go on for as long as 45 minutes. After the trustee questions you, they will ask if there are any creditors present, and creditors can then come up to the desk and ask you questions under oath, but only for 5 minutes. If they want a question for a longer period of time, either the trustee or the creditors, then they can schedule what's called a 2004 examination, which is a more intense interview. Hopefully that doesn't happen. That's a little less comfortable, a little more intrusive. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Once they call your name, you're done in less than 2 minutes. Easy peasy. At the 341 hearing, you'll be asked questions like, did you review your bankruptcy schedules, statement of financial affairs, and means test documents before they were filed with the court? Is everything accurate, true, and correct? Did you actually sign these documents? Has anything changed in your financial situation since your bankruptcy was filed? Have you owned any real estate in the past 4 years? And if so, what happened to that real estate? Are you expecting an inheritance from anyone who has died recently? They might ask if you have transferred any balances from one credit card to another in the past 6 months. They might ask if you've paid any family members on money that you've owed them, debts that you've owed them in the past year. And then they might ask specific questions about your particular situation based on what they've seen in your bankruptcy documents. They'll have reviewed these before your meeting of creditors, so they'll have an idea of what your situation is. And they'll also have reviewed documents that you provided to them before the meeting of creditors. Trustees always ask for documents in every bankruptcy case, and these are usually required to be provided at least 7 days before the meeting of creditors. They don't always have time to look through them in detail, so sometimes they're flipping through them at the meeting of creditors while you're sitting on the other side of the desk. At the end of the Chapter 7 meeting of creditors, they'll either conclude the hearing or they won't. If they conclude the hearing, then that's great. That means you don't have to come back. If they need more information, then they can continue it to another date, and then you have to come back. I won't get into the timeline. If you want to know more about the bankruptcy timeline, you can watch the video on that subject, or you can watch the video about the trustee's role, because that discusses the timeline in more detail. But for now, I'm just going to say that once the 341 hearing is concluded, you do not have to come back, and then whatever type of bankruptcy you have, it just goes through the process. So that's Chapter 7. Chapter 13 is a little different. You're going to be questioned for a longer period of time, usually about 15 minutes. They want to make sure in Chapter 13 that you can afford the plan that you've proposed, and that this is the most that you can afford to pay. You're going to be in bankruptcy for a while, so they spend more time on your case. And you also have to bring the identification documents with you, the proof of your social security number, and the photo ID, and the same rules apply as to those things. So you're going to be at the Chapter 13 341 meeting of creditors for a longer period of time. They're going to ask you questions like, have you filed all required tax returns in the past 5 years? And the reason why they ask that is because you are, number one, required to file them. That's a prerequisite for filing Chapter 13. But number two, that will tell them if the any tax debt that is owed is already included in the bankruptcy. If you haven't filed tax returns, then you might actually owe money that hasn't been factored into what you're proposing to pay through the Chapter 13 plan. So they want to see that these returns have been filed, and in fact the trustee in a Chapter 13 case can actually have your case dismissed if the required tax returns haven't been filed by the Section 341 meeting of creditors. So they always ask about that. They ask about possible other sources of income. They ask about whether you're expecting your income to change. They will probably mention problems that they have with your, if they've not done this previously, and they do have problems with your Chapter 13 plan as proposed, they will mention these at this meeting of creditors and ask for you to change certain things. If they're inclined to approve the plan that you've proposed, then they will usually say that as well. Like if they're inclined to recommend confirmation, they will normally say so at your meeting of creditors. If you're missing information in your bankruptcy, if they've asked for things that you've not done yet, then they're going to continue the meeting of creditors, and you'll have to come back at a later date. And they're less patient about things like this in a Chapter 13. So you really need to be on the ball in getting everything done that they've asked for. And you can also fight with them if you want to. There's an opportunity to do that if you feel like what they're requesting is not appropriate. So that's basically it for the Chapter 13 meeting of creditors. Again, it's going to go on for a longer period of time. Again, creditors don't normally show up, but they sometimes do. And it's usually the same kinds of creditors that show up. The ex-spouses, the ex-business partners, the people that are angry. Those are the people that show up. And yes, maybe your Chase creditor your Chase Bank credit card creditor seemed angry when you spoke to them over the phone, but in general, they really don't care about individual bankruptcy cases. They're not going to show up unless something really serious is happening, like fraud or something of that nature, and they really want to question you under oath. So in most bankruptcy cases, regular creditors like Chase Bank, Citibank, Discover, they don't show up. The payday lenders don't show up. If a creditor shows up, it's most likely going to be, like I said, an ex-spouse, ex-business partner, maybe a landlord, maybe an investor in a business that you've had, but the regular creditors probably aren't going to show up. And once the Chapter 13 meeting of creditors is concluded, your case is usually put on a pending list, and then if you fix everything that needs to be fixed, the Chapter 13 trustee will recommend confirmation. If things still need to be done, they're not going to recommend confirmation, and you might have to go to a confirmation hearing after that. So that's basically it. I didn't spend as much time on it in this video as I did in my video about the trustee's role. I went into greater detail in that video, so if you feel like you need more information, you can certainly watch that video as well. So that's it for this video. I'm not sure what my next video is going to be about, but it'll be about another part of the bankruptcy process. And I plan to do probably 20 videos on the bankruptcy process, so I hope you watch all of them, and I hope that each one is better than the one before. Again, this is kind of a new process for me, making videos, but I'm enjoying it, and I hope you find them to be informative. Thank you.